Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming on this lovely Saturday. We've got Samantha Hammer here, who's going to talk to us about the astrology of family trees. I'm super excited about this topic. Been thinking a lot about my family and the things we have in common lately. And
That's
yeah, I mean, if you're ready and whenever you're ready, feel free
awesome.
to take the floor. Let me change the view of
Okay.
so that yeah, so you won't be blocking anything. You're
Okay.
gonna be on the
Wonderful.
side. Yeah.
Okay. Can you guys see this bar that I see at the top of the screen or
No, we
no?
won't be able
Okay,
to
we're
see that.
clean.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is my talk on the astrology of family trees. Oop. Okay. Well, here we go. I can't. Oh, there we go. Family trees. So, again, hello and welcome. I'm Samantha. A little introduction about myself is I have been studying traditional astrology since 2017. I'm currently a year two student in the fundamentals of astrology, studying under Austin Coppock and his company of wonderful TAs. Through the last few years, I've been fortunate enough to do workshops and attend classes by other many great teachers such as Chris Brennan and Demetra George. So what I'm really trying to say here is that I'm a traditional astrologer through and through by training and by passion. As of 2024, I have been the NORWAC virtual hostess, which has been a complete honor and just the best time getting to learn and connect with other people in the astro community. And as the stars would have it, until this last year, I found myself working at a company alongside evolutionary astrologer Tara All, who really is the one who encouraged me to follow this thread of work. So special thanks to her and her kind and wise words that she is absolutely never short of. I love you, Tara. So I guess I wanted to start with the story of what brought me here to this topic today. And it starts with my grandparents. So I was 26, a baby astrologer, as I like to say, and I noticed that in our family's history, there was a lot of really cool overlapping coincidences. So my grandparents were told when they were a newlywed couple that they wouldn't be able to have children of their own. So they decided to adopt. They adopted their first son, who is a Sag sun and a Sag moon. A couple years later, they adopt a daughter who's an Aries sun and Cancer moon. As luck would have it, after both of the children were adopted, miracles strike, and my grandmother has a son, and he's born with a Sag sun and Sag moon. A couple years later, miracles strike again, and a daughter is born with an Aries sun and Cancer moon. So if you're following my thread, the sons are born with the same sun and moon sign. And note, the moon is actually in the same degree at 23 Sag and some change in the minutes there, but the same degree. And again, the daughters are born with the same sun sign and moon sign. So, how crazy is it that my grandparents, who are not astrologers or anything like that, happen to adopt these children and then just happen to have naturally born kids with the same sun sign, even? It's pretty wild. And so it's been something that's always stuck with me and what has made me see a lot of things in charts that we're here today to talk about. Okay, so a quick overview. The categories, or I'm sorry, a quick outline. We'll be doing an overview. I'll be introducing the categories, explaining some logic and descriptions, and the odds of these things, examples, and then we will end. So I have simmered down my findings in regards to the family tree of all this discussion into categories. But this is not meant to limit what can possibly be present in your family's storylines. These categories represent the reoccurring themes that have presented themselves, let's say, enough times for me to not ignore this very subject we're here to discuss. We will review anonymous charts as case studies for each of these categories to provide examples of this phenomenon. A quick disclaimer, as much as I want to talk about and include every planet in these examples and theme categories, there's just so much detail I would have to dive into, including synodic cycles, which is pretty dense, but absolutely something I do invite people to look at in this work and to consider if they understand concepts such as phases, light and motion, etc. But for the sake of this talk, I think using placements, the placements that I'll lay out will give us plenty of things to consider and plenty for you guys to look at in your family's lines. So let's get into it. So, how to boil this phenomenon down into an organized presentation where I don't come off looking or sounding like this, our Charlie meme, has been a tremendous effort. There is so much that can be done with this work. It's kind of like the sky's the limit. And I dare say it's probably a reason why not a lot of formal work exists about this kind of stuff. So I hope you can understand these categories that I am going to lay out as kind of guidelines to start maybe being able to give this work some organization. So here are the categories. So if you are allotted a time of birth with a family member or family members, go ahead and look at the inherited sun sign, the moon sign, inherited ascendant signs, inherited decans and exact degrees, inherited dignity, and inherited traditional rulership placements, which sounds a little wonky, but I promise I'll explain that. Or as I've been calling these categories, the big six. And if you're not allotted a time of birth, you go ahead and turn your big six into a big five, 86ing the rising sign, because if you don't have a birth time, you'll never really know, um, you know, exactly what that is. I also want to note if you are working with charts that don't have birth times, in any work really, you want to make sure those moons are not cuspy. And so what I do is I make sure a moon is within the first 6 degrees of a sign and before the last 6 degrees of a sign. You want those moons right in the middle, just for certainty's sake. So the logic behind this: the sun, moon, and ascendant signs are safe bets. They don't retrograde. Their motion and pace are fixed and unchanging. They trek through the sky like clockwork, lending us a sturdy baseline from which to measure this work, which is already hard to measure without getting lost in the weeds when we're going for trees. Decans, degrees, dignity, planet rulership. These are what I have found most often in the examples that I've seen within my own family, as well as clients, colleagues, coworkers, and celebrities. These categories can speak to a ton of inherited personal traits and give quite a bit of information without a proper birth time, making this work available for people who will never maybe find a birth time for family members, which is going to happen if you're doing you know, enough of these. So as long as you have a exact birth date and location, this is going to be pretty available for people to explore. All right, so this has been my favorite part to do personally. The astronomical facts and odds, to help really ground the gravity of these planetary placements in regards to quote unquote inheritance. These are going to be listed in order from most rare to less rare. So the inherited ascendant sign. Due to diurnal motion, which refers to the motion of the Earth's rotation from west to east, causing celestial bodies to have an apparent motion that they're moving from east to west. This is important to note and to consider because the rising sign of the chart will tick to the next sign backwards in zodiacal order, bearing a new ascendant every 2.5 hours or so. So families with reoccurring sun signs, that means out of a 24-hour day, those people with the same rising signs all happen to be born within that 2.4-hour window that the zodiac sign marked that day. And the odds of a child having the same sign as one of its parents or any relative is 1 in 144, 0.69%. Um, this is wild. So I thank you, AI. I was able to do a lot of like statistical work that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I've never taken a class in statistics, but any mathematicians out there, please don't come for me if this is wrong. It's still really cool. Even if it's not correct, it is kind of, you get a background of understanding of why that is pretty rare. It moves very quickly in regards to a day. So families sharing this is pretty wild. Thank you to the Astrology podcast for this borrowed graphic that I used. The inherited moon. So, according to NASA, the moon covers a distance roughly equal to its diameter, meaning the moon is moving at a speed of 2,288 miles per hour, or also known as fast as fuck. The moon changes signs every 2.5 days and does a complete lap around the zodiac every 27.3 days. And the odds of a baby having the same moon placement by sign as one of its parents or relatives is 1 in 12. But we'll get into a little bit of the more nitty gritty in regards to that. The inherited sun. So the odds of a baby sharing the same sun sign as one of its parents or relatives are again 1 in 12. But considering as long as there weren't some extreme birth planning protocols set in place to do so purposefully, they would have had to have all been conceived around the same time. And taking into consideration that people kind of can struggle with conception regardless. The fact that these things can happen to line up within around a 14-day window, let's say, that's an approximation. The sun sign is a really cool thing to have, inherited or, redundant in a family line because the probability of that is pretty low, 3.8%. A couple more things about the sun. The sun moves 1 degree per day through the zodiac. And when a family has a repetitive sun sign gene, what you end up having is the likelihood of the members of the family, not only with the same sun sign, but given that astronomically speaking, Mercury can only be 28 degrees ahead or behind the sun. And similarly, Venus can only get a maximum distance of 47 degrees away from the sun, which isn't even 2 full signs ahead or behind, making this a probability of the family members potentially sharing Mercury and Venus signs or placements as well. But again, I'm not going to get into that because that has a lot to do with retrograde activity in a little bit more detail than we want to go into today. So, the concept of the category of inherited dignity. So, in astrology, we measure the quality of a chart by these principles anyway: familiarity, strength, certainty, competence, and favorability. Taking these qualities and applying them to the charts of a family or branch of a family will show a type of quality in relationship that can be had without a synastry chart, which might sound kind of controversial. And I am no expert at synastry charts, but again, this idea that it's not rocket science if you know astrology pretty well, looking at dignity and or lack thereof can show these principles at hand and coloring what relationships might be like for this family or family branch. Inherited decans and exact degrees. So, a quick synopsis on decans. Decans are when the 30 degrees of a zodiac sign are split into 10 equal parts. Each sign will have 3 sections. These sections are then assigned a planet. So, if you hear me say this family member and this family member both have this planet in a decan, it'll sound something like this. both of their suns are in Aries 1, meaning the first decan of Aries. The probability of a child and or a relative, the probability of a child and a relative having a planet share the same 10 degrees of a sign is approximately 2.78%. Why we would look to this perhaps in lineage work and relationship work overall, using the decans for this, especially without a birth time, maybe for someone who's not even around anymore, or maybe you're not comfortable with getting this information like a birth time from them. The decans can show us the energy behind the sun in Aries 1, because backing that sun is Mars, and Aries is a Mars ruled sign. So it's safe to say that person will identify greatly with martial things, as opposed to maybe someone with the sun in Aries 3 who will have the sun in a Jupiter or Venus ruled decan, depending on which system you're looking at, triplicity or Chaldean. I like to use both. Okay, so here are the examples to back these categories I've come up with. I have so many of these. I've done my best to boil them down into just a couple, so we're not here for hours. So here we go. Inherited ascendant signs. So this is the first family example. As you can see, it's a mother born in a different country and at a different time of the year than she would go on to have her children. The mother and both of her children share a Libra rising. Also note the mom has moon conjunct the ascendant in Libra, and both the mother and daughter share their ascendant in Libra 1. The probability of this, I just reposted that little stat down below there. But yeah, so this is kind of a really cool thing to see, not it being passed down by so many generations, but there's very cut and clear. All the entire family has a Libra rising. Inherited sun signs. So family example 2. This is an example of a Cancer moon getting passed down through 4 generations. All of these suns are in Cancer 3. The great grandfather, grandfather, and son also have a 29th degree Mars placement, but pretty wild. And then also note the dad's sun. I'm so sorry, it's so small, but the sun that the dad has is at 29 degrees. So there's a Cancer 3 thread, but then also this exact degree thread that we are able to follow and explore. Inherited sun sign, one more for you guys. A grandfather, dad, daughter, son, all with Leo 2 sons, except for the last chart down below there, which is a Leo 1. Just very funny because the dignity being, sun in Leo, getting passed down 2 generations, pretty wild. Inherited decans and degrees. So this example is really interesting. So we see a dad's Venus at 25 Cancer. His first wife passes away after giving birth to their first son in the late 1960s. That son's moon is at 27 Cancer. To highlight the tone of this placement, that death was unexpected and extremely tragic, and the dad never processed it and carried tremendous trauma for his entire life and legacy. He would go on to remarry and have 3 more kids with another woman, 1 girl and 2 more boys. The daughter you see here, she shares her IC at the 27th degree of Cancer. And note that the other 2 sons that he had with the next woman didn't share any of these placements. So really interesting. This is part 2 of this example. The son that's mom passed away giving birth to him would go on to have 2 sons of his own, the first one carrying on a Mars at 27 Cancer, and the second son with a Mercury at 27 Cancer. So the implications of this are pretty wild, and it is a lot to chew on, but I think there's a lot more at play than just timing and all these things. It makes me wonder if grief and trauma can even be passed down through these placements. Something to consider. So now we have a bit of a hybrid example, the inherited ascendant sign, moon, dignity, and exact degree. We have a mother with her two kids. With her daughter, a Leo, they both share a Leo rising and dignified sons. The daughter's sun is in Leo, and the mother's sun sign is in Aries in its joy and exalted. The mom and son share Cancer moons, both at 22 degrees. So the probability of the same sign being shared by two people, given that the moon has a 2.5-day duration in a sign, this which is roughly represented within the 12 signs. Probability of the same degree, this is an approximation of 1 in 3 chances. So we're looking at a 1 in 360 chance of someone sharing a moon in the same sign and degree. I don't think there's anything that gets me more excited in this work than seeing like a really fast moving planet in the exact same degree and sign. It's just so crazy. It's so, so cool. Okay, our last example, I think, inherited traditional planetary rulership placements. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Kardashians, but they are a reality star TV family. Um, and here we go. So we have the parents at the top. Chris is the mom, Rob is the dad. What struck me most is that this father, Rob Sr., has his rising sign in Capricorn and a moon in Aquarius, which are both Saturn ruled signs. His sun is in Pisces, which is one of the two Jupiter ruled signs in traditional astrology, the other one being Sagittarius. All of the rising signs of the children are either traditionally ruled by Saturn or Jupiter. To me, this is an obvious inheritance from the dad's placements of the big three. So we have the daughter Courtney having a Pisces rising, the daughter Chloe with an Aquarius rising, Kim with a Sag rising, and the son Rob with an Aquarius rising. And to bring the mother into this, Chris and Kim both have a Jupiter at 28 degrees in the 10th house. And Chloe and Chris, they both have a moon at 25 degrees in separate signs. Chris is her moon is in Cancer and Chloe's is in Gemini. But still pretty fascinating. I wasn't going to include it. I have a lot to say about this family just because they're kind of like in the limelight a lot of the time, for better or for worse. And there's a lot more that I could point out, but we're not going to get that deep into them. So the karmic implications, meeting traditional astrology sort of technique. I heard this quote from my teacher, Austin Kopic, and he says, using a karmic model simplifies the idea that virtually all of the natal chart represents our karma earned at some point, even times before this one. Remember that not all karma is bad. It is inertia or momentum of actions. If you have caused enough harm in a particular area, it doesn't just stop. If you've caused something good, if you've helped or caused learning or joy, that doesn't just stop. That has a momentum. And the contention and a number of powerful and influential ways of thinking is that this momentum and its effects that in themselves become causes continue not just throughout one's life, but throughout a cascade of lives. So, this idea that seeing perhaps the karmic of our past actions and current actions are shown in the chart, this has a lot to do with potentially the relationships that we're here to, make right potentially within our families. And so I think this karmic implication is something worth utilizing when doing any ancestral work or lineage work. And I hope that if any of you decide to go off and explore this with your own family, keeping that stuff in mind, I think will be very helpful and lead to meaningful change or what have you. And you are invited to do this work. Sorry. So please, I really, really, really encourage everyone to take a look and see what you see in your families. And please do not be mistaken that this stuff only applies to your own flesh and blood. Another talk for another day is that this absolutely applies to your chosen family and your friends. These things are absolutely repeated within my husband and best friend. It doesn't really ever seem to stop. And it's really interesting. It's almost like we're attracting a certain type of human via our placements or something. So, yeah. And other categories that I didn't want to touch on today, such as inherited nodes, inherited moon phase, inherited outer planet placements, inherited retrograde cycles, and beyond. I have gotten so many good examples from so many people, from my classes and colleagues and things like that, with so many cool stories. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this work just yet. This is just really the beginning. And so if this interests you, please don't be shy. Reach out. I would love to hear from you and see what you're finding as well. Thank you. And here's my information. I'm most readily available at samanthahammerastrology.com. If you join my mailing list, I won't bombard you with emails. I maybe send one once a month with live updates, and any social media can be found right there as well. And I think I'm good. Yeah, that's my last slide.
Okay, thank you so much, Samantha, for giving us this high-level summary of key points to get started with when it comes to delving into the astrology of your lineage. And I just want to take the last half of this to give people a chance to ask any questions or share any comments or experiences, because I think this could be a great starting point for dialogue.
It's
So
very it's perfect timing for like spooky season about to start too.
definitely. I cannot say this person's name, but if you have your hand raised, feel free to unmute as well.
Um, do you mean me?
Yes.
Hi.
Oh, you can just call me Gare. I don't know. Like I basically put my like my dead name because I go to honestly I'm just trying to figure out what I can do with the church that I'm going to right now. But yeah, so I have a so essentially in the last part Samantha mentioned something about essentially like karma, right? And please correct me if like I'm wrong on this or try to under if I'm wrong on this. But essentially me and my mom, we both have like Scorpio Venuses. And essentially they're both in like houses that will essentially mean like, okay, like we have problems with women. So in that sense, like because from what I got from Samantha, it essentially is like, you know, this is kind of like the karma or like the actions that like essentially like I'm meant to fix. Or I don't know, because I was thinking about a different example with my dad, because we both have Scorpio stelliums, but I don't really think that like applies because we have it in different houses, so it has completely two different meanings. But yeah, I just had a question. Is that what you meant? Like that's essentially like the karma that like I'm meant to fix, or did you mean something else?
Um, I don't know if I would necessarily say fix, but it's something to be aware of and to consider moving through life. I think we all have karmic ties and knots that can use untangling, and that's not necessarily always possible, but using this as a framework to maybe kind of understand, like, oh, like if you're at least, pretty fluent in astrology, you can kind of see why that dynamic might be needed to be untangled, because there might be something that's not just applicable to this life, but potentially even ones preceding this one, and giving yourself the grace to allow that to be healed to whatever capacity that it can be. I'm not the expert on karma necessarily, but I feel like it's a starting point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions that they would like to ask Samantha about just the astrology of family trees, or is there anything that you guys would like to clarify?
I'm going through the chat too, and I'm seeing it's so funny how many water moons end up getting shared within families, exact degrees or like same sign, Scorpio, Cancer. I don't know. And like I'm not the expert on this, you guys. Like this is really just a deep the first dive and exploration of this. Like definitely keep your notes and everything in check because I think it is worth noting.
Yeah, it looks like Rashima had a question.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Hi. I was curious if you found in some of your examples, um, like similarities through some charts between parents and children and grandparents, and then maybe there's like
Black
one
sheep.
child that's like a wild card and
Yes.
like has something completely different. What would you maybe like delineate or frame, you know, that example?
That's a really good question, and one that I haven't thought too deep on, but to your point, they definitely do exist, those wild card charts. And maybe this might sound so woo-woo, but like maybe that is kind of something in the karmic tie to consider, you know, the outcast of the family, depending on which side of that you're on. Maybe you're the astrologer that feels like the wild card. That usually is the case a lot of the time. People feel like they don't belong, so they find astrology and um, look at it. And so maybe that would be something to consider in the framework for you to be able to kind of carry on understanding that, oh, like none of my inner planets align with any of my family. How fitting. I've never felt like I fit in anyway. I don't know, but that's a really good question. One I don't have a great answer for, but thank you.
No,
I
that was
do
great.
I do
Thank
want
you.
to jump in here
Yeah.
because my that actually ends up being true for my mom. So
Okay.
in her immediate family, like with her full-blooded sisters, my grandma and grandpa, all of them are either Capricorn or Aquarius moon. And my mom's the only Pisces moon.
Oh, sweet
Like,
angels.
and so when I hear how she talks about connecting with family and how family was tight-knit but difficult, and how she's the one who was the first to like move out and away from people, and she keeps her distance for like good reason, and you
Wow.
know she's the one who's more sensitive whereas
Yeah.
everyone is very insensitive.
As a
um
cat moon, I can attest.
yeah, I was like, wow. I'm like, that's a very different dynamic from even my immediate family, because everybody was either jovial moon in some sense, like the moon is in Jupiter's sign or exaltation, or interacting with Jupiter. So it's
Interesting.
very different experiences growing up.
That's really interesting. I have a similar thing with my grandma. She's basically always been the one person in the house that's a lion's den. Um, she's a Pisces sun. It's like, oh, grandma, she's the heart of the family, though, I say.
I don't know who is next and had their
I
hand up,
know.
but either Haley or Kennedy, if you're ready, share.
Hello. So I've actually started doing, I put together a chart of my immediate family, my stepdad, my mom, my sisters, my grandmother, and then my best friend, and then all of our partners.
Yeah.
And in this table, I've noticed that the for my mom and my dad's marriage, and then for my sister and her husband's marriage, they all have Chiron, the respective marriages have Chiron in the same sign. So for example, my mom and my stepdad both have Chiron in Aries. Different houses, of course. But you know, I noticed that same thing with my sister and her husband. And I found it, I thought that was really interesting. Like, but I'm just kind of curious, what might you say to that, or what how might you view that?
Definitely a cool synchronicity. But I'm really not familiar. The Demetra George work that I've done has been so much of everything else besides her famous asteroid work. So I'm not really sure. Does anyone here know anything about the asteroids that would care to comment? I'm really not sure.
Was the asteroid in question Chiron?
Yes. The healed warrior or something. Wounded.
Yeah, wounded healer. My only thing with Chiron, especially if it's like your parents sharing a Chiron placement, is that Chiron spends like 7 years, give or take, in a
Okay.
sign. It spends quite a bit of time in a sign. So there's something semi-generational going
Mm,
on there. I find if you're going to use Chiron in that way, it's more compelling to look at Chiron by house, even if it's not in
interesting.
the same sign. So, for example, come from a long line of divorce. Me and a
Yeah.
lot of the women in my family have Chiron in the seventh in different signs, and I just see the struggle with relationship as a
Interesting.
concept. Yeah.
Very interesting.
So, granted, because Chiron doesn't rule anything, you have to consider the ruler's placement. And I know for a lot of those people, the seventh house ruler is also in detriment. So, like, that's
Mm,
also another issue.
very
Um,
interesting.
so those are things to kind of keep in mind, I would say.
Thank you
Very
so
good.
much.
Yeah, great question.
I think Haley had their hand up at one point.
Oh, okay.
I did have a question. So I joined kind of late, so it's kind of yeah. So basically, I've been kind of looking into my family's astrology for a minute. Something that kind of sticks out to me and my family is that my dad was born around a lunar eclipse, and I was born around a similar
Mhm.
solar eclipse, and my sister was as well. Particularly, it's in Leo, so I feel like it's a little bit more important or significant. And so I was wondering if there's any like books or resources or anything you can offer that, yeah, eclipse families are wild. Yeah, they
Yeah.
are. There's a comment. But yeah, so if there's like any resources and things you can like recommend that I could look into just for any like insight into that.
Well, so I should have added that in my last slide under more work to explore because yes, the eclipse cycles and charts are definitely something that I have noted and I actually have a ton of examples of as well. Um, as far as recommendations, I am drawing a blank. I'm looking at my bookshelf right here. Um, I think just really kind of taking into consideration the nodes themselves are just a very confusing thing in anyone's chart. And knowing that what they ultimately are trying to bring focus to is a balance and need in the life. So even if you just are getting the book by Rob Hand, like Planets and uh, the houses and the classics that are going to kind of go over house placement if you have again an accurate birth time. um Rashima, yes, Austin's series on the nodes is spectacular. It's available for download on his website, I believe. But yeah, just taking into consideration where that focus is being pulled to by sign and everything else is something that I would look to and to see if you can find anything following that thread.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mhm. All right. Something I also wanted to include that I should have also have said, um, a lot of these, like this work is never going to be finished, it will go on without you too. And so something I haven't done just yet is add all the grandchildren to my mom's side of the family, because there's quite a few of them running around now. I was kind of the first grandchild born. My mom had me just kind of young, and there was an age gap between her brothers and sisters as well. So I have like 4-year-old cousins running around. And so getting their information and adding it in, like I think I did do a couple of them recently, and seeing the grandmother I just mentioned being the only Pisces in the lion's den. But there's a grandchild with a Pisces moon that's entered the chat, if you will. And so knowing that those placements are going to be passed down again and, in other places is something to also remember.
I did have a question for you, speaking of astrology. So I know that, for example, once you do have a full-on chart for someone and you're aware of their like perfections or something, have you seen children's charts correspond to like those really big transits and activations? Because I think that's really cool when that kind of thing happens.
Oh yeah, no, it's so crazy. My husband and his dad have like the same signs activated each perfection, and so like when an eclipse happens or something, it's like, oh, let's be careful. What's going on? So that exclamation point kind of added to the entire thing. But honestly, something I haven't done too deep of a dive on. So again, if anyone wants to do that, I would love to know what you see.
One cool thing I've seen is when I've done people's Davison relationship charts. So it's slightly different than a composite because the
Okay.
composite is pure midpoints,
Yeah.
whereas the Davison is like, okay, average birth date and time and
Ooh.
location. So it's like a it's
I've
a
never heard
real
of that.
it's a real fake chart. So I love doing
Okay.
them. That's probably the most modern thing I do
Yeah, no.
astrologically. But I've seen some people where it's like the child's chart literally has the same rising in some placements as the Davison. So if you look at Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's first son, their Davison has like a Taurus rising and all these other
Ooh.
planets, and so does their first kid's chart. And it's really crazy. Yeah.
I really do resonate with that meme I had at the beginning of my slides with the Charlie, like with the background of like all the craziness behind him. That's what I start to feel like, because I'm like, and then I get lost in this sauce. And I have to like dial in my traditional astrologer and be like, okay, focus. What's actually sticking out here? Because it's so easy to get lost like that and like go nuts. But
Okay.
still very fun.
Yeah, it looks like Gare has another question.
Me and my sister both have the same rising sign. It
Mhm.
doesn't come from like any of our parents though. They have like completely different rising signs. But yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yes, that's so cool. And like maybe you don't have your, the generations before just your parents, but that might be a thread if you're able to find out their birth dates to just see if there's a birth time at least.
I know my mom and dad like we don't like basically we didn't get those like risings from them, but I think it's possibly like our grandmas, our grandparents, something like that.
Yeah, that's really cool though. Thanks for sharing. I love knowing that other people experience this and I'm not the only one going crazy over here.
Marilyn, feel free to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question. This is for a total astrology newbie, know nothing. Could you recommend a simple book that would sort of take us by the hand, give us really, really basic information?
Well, I have only one recommendation, and it's the Hellenistic Astrology, the study of fate and fortune by Chris Brennan. It's not necessarily beginner in its depth, but it absolutely goes over everything that I've spoken about here today, at least.
So the author
And
is Chris Brennan.
yes.
And the title, one more time, Samantha?
If you just search Hellenistic astrology, the
Okay.
study of fate and fortune.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Oh yes, Chiani's book is very good. I just recently listened to it on audio. Or I'm sorry, on Spotify, I think, or Audible. It was so good.
What's the title of Channy's book? Is it You Were Born for
You Were Born
This?
for This.
Or
Yes.
something like that. Yeah, that's another one that's definitely more accessible
Yeah.
because she studied under Demetra George. And,
Mhm.
you know, of course, Demetra has her two-volume series on traditional astrology that's quite
Phenomenal.
phenomenal. Oh yes, and then Astrology for Yourself, which
Yes,
is very much like
very good.
Demetra first getting into traditional
Yeah,
astrology, making it accessible.
absolutely.
Yeah, no. Wait a second. Isn't because she wrote the first one in the 90s, right?
She
So I'm
did.
guessing it's like kind of the Saturn return almost of the first book.
Yes, it is
Okay.
so funny. I was recently in Austin's classes where we just went through zodiacal releasing and finding out the time period in which was activated for her to come back with that book because I guess she was kind of having a crisis once traditional astrology kind of came into play with her
Hmm.
modern, teachings. She was like, "What do I do?" And that's the title. Astrology for Yourself is her, boiling both down and making them her own and relearning astrology. I thought that was just so interesting.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
that's noted. I mean, speaking of zodiacal releasing, I've been thinking about that a lot, especially when it comes to identifying key milestones around like family, usually around like either like joining a family through marriage or like joining a family because I don't know, someone's born or
Yeah.
something. Um,
Entrance.
are there like ways that you would kind of like look to those time periods to see if like that's going to happen, one, and then two, like is the quality of that sign often like spoken to when, say, you're marrying a person or you're having a child? Like, is it something that you've seen or like is it something you're still
I'm still deep diving. To be honest with you, the zodiacal releasing of everything has been the most challenging thing to really get my footing with in regards to astrology. I've said to my friends and husband, like, this is the first time I'm really learning. I've been in Austin's classes for 2 years now, but this is
Mhm.
the first thing I'm coming in with zero knowledge of because it's the fundamentals. When you've been studying a long time, you're just getting kind of a deeper knowledge on these things. Zodiacal releasing is so crazy though. I like think I do understand it. It's just so mind-blowing what you can really see. And so to answer that question, just for instance, um so I was born with a Capricorn um lot of fortune. I'm sorry, spirit. And as soon as that ended, I moved into a Pisces. Did I say Capricorn and Aquarius? I'm
You
sorry.
said
I was
Capricorn.
sorry, Aquarius. I was born with an Aquarius. So once that time period ended, I went into a Pisces period, and obviously Jupiter ruled. I get married within that week of entering that period, which is
Wow.
just very funny going from Saturn to Jupiter, like very interesting stuff. So I do think, yes, what you're asking is totally possible. I just haven't gotten a chance necessarily to
Got
take
it.
that type of a dive.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm still trying to figure out how to read Eros releasing
Oh,
versus spirit just because
yeah,
it's very it's a lot more specific, I
it
would
is.
say. And yeah, I mean for myself, like I see that I'm going into not only a peak period on level
Ooh.
2 from Eros, but it's
Ooh.
the sign that contains the Lord of Eros. So I'm like,
Ooh, okay.
what does that mean? And then if you guys have been getting into Dr. Ali Alomi's stuff with like the medieval Islamic and astrology, I think that's also the same year that I start what's called a period of felicity for Daria. And so
Okay.
then it's like, okay, is there like a child person coming? Because that's typically what periods of felicity point to, either planting the seeds for relationships or like welcoming children and things like
Interesting.
that. So it's just like, who knows? But like both of those periods are have like a either a jovial or a Saturnian quality because it's like
Interesting.
a Jupiter Saturn Fardar and then it's like a Sag zodiacal releasing period. So then it's like something's going on here and
You'll have to keep us posted, girl.
I can't quite articulate what that's about. So but we'll see. We'll see. And I hope that as more people do start looking at the astrology of their lineages, they can see how it like ties into
Yeah.
their timing or their family's timing. And if there's certain archetypes that show up, because I think there's something to be said about like, like the themes that your family is prone to dealing with and sort of like the story
Yeah,
that like the story of your family, right?
exactly. How beautiful. I haven't even thought that into like that realm of this work either. Like, absolutely being able to do kind of map it out, finding what you see, and kind of assigning that, you know, karmic implication and archetype is a really kind of thing to do. That's kind of an amazing idea.
Yeah, no, like so I'm just like, okay, we'll get there eventually, but
Yeah.
like now
We
every
have to catch up.
time exactly, and now every time the kid is born, because like my cousin has like he just had his like fourth kid or something. It's crazy. And then my other cousin had his first kid like I think within the last couple of weeks. So I need to go like dig around and be like, hey, give me a
Yes,
birth time,
please.
please. Thank
Yes.
you. Like just collecting everybody's info.
Oh, I know. I feel like a psycho sometimes. I'm like, okay, everyone's like used to it at this point now,
Okay,
though.
not psycho, the family historian. Somebody has to be.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
um,
1000%.
but yeah, does anyone else have any last comments, final like thoughts that they want to share? Because this is great.
This was so fun, you guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. This was my first time doing something like this. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think we can wrap up.
Awesome.
And yeah, so for those of you who want to sit with this lecture, if you are a member, it will be in the archive, so you can watch it as many
Yay.
times as you want. If you're not a member, please consider joining Aya today. It's only $25 a year. You get to see talks from people like Samantha and other astrologers who have talked us through um, their experience with the sectors of astrology that they interface with. So
That archive is worth 25 bucks to
it
me.
is
Gigantic.
literally, it's gigantic and growing.
Yes.
Also, if you are an IA member who would love to speak for us or write a blog, send us an email at, let me type this in the chat, youngastrologers.com at gmail.com. Duh. And we can talk and arrange something. We're still looking for speakers for next year, so
Oh yeah, I'll be inputting. I'm gonna be sending you guys over my proposal for my next one too after this.
okay, yeah, no, let me know and we
Yeah.
can work something out.
Awesome.
Okay,
Bye guys. Thank you so much.
take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see.